It is Wednesday, April 21st, 2021. My name is Jim Vessel. Welcome to Competitive Corner. Each week, we're going to take a deep dive into the competitive 40K scene and discuss tournament results, tactics, and take questions from you, the viewer. Today, I am joined by legendary YouTube Battle Report producer Winters SEO. Winters, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on. It's
Thank
lovely to
you
be
for
here.
coming on. Yeah, I'm excited to do the show, this kind of inaugural show with you. This is the first time we're doing this show, and obviously it's something that we've been working on for a few weeks. So maybe I guess we could start with, I know you got a much larger audience than me, but I thought maybe a good place to start would be maybe just to introduce yourself a little bit to not just the current audience, but maybe any future audience that does tune in that maybe not quite so familiar with who you are. And
Yeah.
I'll definitely do the same as well, because I'm sure there's lots of people in your audience that doesn't know me. So
Okay. Well, I've been running battle reports and tutorials and review videos and things like that on YouTube for 6 years now. And I also help run deploymentzone.tv, which is a subscription service. Um, and the ways that works is it's $5 a month and you get some more videos. Play on Tabletop are currently in there doing a series with us. We've got Den of Imagination, the painting studio. They're going to be doing a tutorial series for us in there, podcasts, things like that. The reason why we started Deployment Zone was a way to help lift. YouTube doesn't provide enough income for a niche hobby for niche content creators like us. So it was a way to bring more content creators together and provide an income so we can help more content creators create more. More community equals more Warhammer more often. That's a quote from Mike Brandt itself, actually.
that's a great
And
quote.
so I'm pretty well known on the narrative side of things and on this side of the pond for making battle reports and campaigns. Not so well known at all when it comes to the competitive scene, but Deployment Zone is a large church, and we're reaching out to lots of different people to diversify the content as much as possible. And that's when you got in contact.
That's right.
So here
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah. So here we are. So for those of you that don't know, my name is Jim Vessel. I am I'd say I'd call myself a competitive 40K player, but I'm also a very passionate hobbyist. It's something that is very, very important to me. Achieving a really strong balance of hobby and paint and sportsmanship. So it's something that I do practice at a very high level as well. And in fact, if someone had asked me whether I would rather never paint again or never play again, I would say never play again. So I'd prefer to be a hobbyist over a player if I had to make the
Mm.
choice. With that said, I've always had a bit of a competitive mindset, whether it's in my professional career or games I used to play as a kid. It's something that I've always tried to not necessarily win at all costs, but I like challenges. I like things that mentally challenge me and that make me really think really hard. And there's something about competitive 40K that really it is the marriage of the hobby side with the competitive side that actually keeps me in the game, because I think if there's a lot of much better competitive games I think out there, and I think you'd probably agree. There's games that are like pure competitive where they're totally competitive. They don't care about anything else. There's computer games obviously that are incredibly competitive, which I used to play as a kid. I'm getting too old for like first person shooters. Like my reaction skills are not what they used to be. And so the reason that I've always been drawn to 40K and Games Workshop games in particular, Warhammer Fantasy being my true and long lost love, is that it's combined these elements of competitive game with a lot of like cerebral play with the great hobby side, which I love as well. There's no other thing
Yeah.
on the world, if you ask me, that can kind of marries these two, I guess, elements as nice as 40K and Age of Sigmar and the Games Workshop hobby. Um,
Yeah. Well, you're not just a competitive person, you're a creative person. As you said, there's loads of games where you can be competitive, like UFC, you could punch other people in the face, or football or chess, but you're creative as well. You love the fantasy, you love the immersion. And I was talking to someone recently, Steve, not Rob, in the Deployment Zone just recently about you, and he watches and listens to a lot of your podcast stuff, and he very much likes, and I like your attitude, the best in show attitude, which is you want to be, I feel like you want to be the best at the hobby you can be, which means painting the best you can, but being the best player. And being the best player doesn't necessarily mean beating the crap out of the person in front of you and making them cry. Being the best player doesn't mean being that whack gamer. Being the best player means using your army the best way that you can, testing yourself against whatever opponents, against whatever you run up against. So painting well, being a good host, being a good competitor, being gracious, and being the best you can with your army. And I think some tournament players, some competitive players can get a bad name, but if you focus on yourself more rather than on destroying the people around you more, if you try and be the best player you can be, then it just raises everyone's game, I think. So I very much admire that about you, Jim.
Thank
Got
you.
that down.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to that point, I've been a lifelong Chaos player. My very first kit I ever bought was a box of 12 Chaos Warriors back in like 1997 when I started the hobby.
Nice.
And Chaos has had its ups and downs. And I actually have a Soul Drinkers army, Space Marines, and Space Marines are very good right now. And but I always go back to my Chaos, and so
Yeah.
from that perspective, as much as I could probably play the most bleeding edge best army right now, which we're going to talk about later, it seems to be the Dark Eldar, or Drukhari. Sorry, I'm old school still, so I still call things Dark
Nice.
Eldar and like Imperial Guard. Those are still the names in my head. But we're
Yeah.
going to talk a little bit about Dark Eldar later on the show. But I could kind of be chasing the meta in that sense. But for me, it's more important about playing armies that I really connect with, and I don't know if it's a good thing that I connect with Chaos so readily. Maybe
Well,
that speaks to me about my character, that I love the evil, like oppressive,
the
like
thing that
demonic
me
army.
why chaos? That is what springs to mind. What connects you?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's always been the visual aspects. It's been what I love. Like if you look at my army, you guys can check out my Instagram. It's JimboV_paints. I post all my like work in progress, but and photos there. But I've always painted extremely kind of high contrast, high saturation, bright. I've loved the kind of Baroque Gothic style of Chaos. Like the visual language really spoke to me, the art really spoke to me, and I've always just
Mm,
loved their background. I loved that it is more fantastical than, say, like at the end of the day, obviously there's a lot of fantasy in like, say, Imperium or in the Empire or in the more human kind of regular, but at the end of the day, the someone that has a deep kind of love for things like D&D and like sci-fi and like fantasy, Chaos really has a lot more of that elements of like magic and like kind of being way more out there than the kind of
yeah.
Imperium factions. Imperium's feels a little boring to me, I guess. And obviously there's a lot of background in the Imperium, but there's just something about Chaos. And also I love converting. I've always loved converting scratch
Right. Yeah.
building
Yeah.
models,
Yeah.
and there's no army in the game like Chaos that gives you the opportunity to really flex your hobby skills. Like I have
Yeah.
about, I think I last count I had like 12 different demon princes. Not a single one is the
Nice.
Games Workshop actual demon prince model. They're all either scratch
Nice.
built or like converted, or like none of them are stock models. Like
Nice.
you just can't get them. And a lot of my
Yeah.
models
Yeah.
are scratch built or converted. And I love that. I love that it's unique and that it's mine. And you can't really do that with this intercessor, right? You can't really do that with a Space Marine
No.
Scout,
Mm,
even though I've tried.
yeah.
It's just,
Well, not
well,
to
you
the
can't
same
take it
degree
as
as
far,
that.
I guess. But and even in my Soul Drinkers army, I definitely have a lot of conversions. A lot of my characters are scratch built. But Chaos just has this like unique. It really helps me, scratches a lot of itches, I guess,
Yeah.
as far as like what I like about the hobby. So that's kind of my draw to it. Um, so yeah, so that's a little bit about me. And as I mentioned, I used to play very regularly in tournaments. Obviously, we're quite in a little bit of a pandemic still here in Canada.
COVID.
So, but things are getting better. So I am optimistic that I'll be able to start playing in events. I have been playing a lot of TTS, so Tabletop Simulator, which doesn't really do it for me, but it is something that fills the gap and is at least trying to keep my pencil sharp, so to speak, and my brain in that kind of competitive. And I'm obviously a member of the WTC, the World Team Championship team for Team Canada. We have actually just, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but I like to always give you guys exclusives, but we've we were just going to be announcing this week that the team is actually now dissolved for the 2021 season, and that we will be restarting applications, and basically everyone's getting kicked out, and the whole team is going to be rebuilt for the 2022 season. So there is no grandfather clause. So the fact that I was on the team, well, I didn't actually even get to go to the WTC the last 2 years because
that's
it was
a COVID
canceled
thing though, right?
Right, but I'm just saying, so if you are interested in that and you're in Canada and you're a Canadian citizen, we will be actually starting our application process from scratch. So everyone, including the current members, are going to have to reapply, go through that process again. So that's something that I'm looking forward to kind of doing, as well as balancing my kind of hobby side with the game. So
can I just jump in as well? Because there'll be a chunk of my audience or the deployment zone audience. When you say I used to play in tournaments, I think you're underselling yourself a little bit there, Jim. You're a member of the were a member of the Canadian national team, and you did very, very well in a certain tournament recently. Was it #1 hobby score, #2 in the ITC? 2018?
Yeah, so the 2019, 2019
okay.
season, I finished #1 in the hobby track, which is kind of, so in the ITC, for those of you that are not familiar, stands for the independent. It used to be independent tournament circuit, but now I think they've changed it to international tournament circuit, because originally it was very much North American heavy, and now a lot of European events, especially mostly European events, and then like Eastern Europe, especially, and like in some of the like Poland and Russia and stuff, have started to run a lot more ITC tournaments. Even in Southeast Asia, like Japan, I think, had their first ITC tournament a few years ago. So it's starting, and they were actually planning to run a team at the World Team Championship. So the international tournament circuit, it's basically a tournament ranking system. You get points for playing in tournaments. I believe I believe in 2018, I think there was around 2019, there's about 10,000 players registered. So as long as you just play in one event, you are essentially are in an ITC event, you're put in the database of your results, right? Now, the nice thing I've always liked about the ITC is that beyond just being like a tracking system for your results, there is really no other requirements to be an ITC event. The tournament organizers can run their tournament however they want. They can run whatever missions they want, whatever scoring they want. It's just, there's obviously some minimums. Like, I think now it's required that you have a painting standard. So in the past, I think you could be an ITC tournament and not actually have a 3-color minimum painting standard. And now I believe the Games Workshop Battle Ready standard is like the minimum. So your tournament has to have that standard, which I think is a great thing. So in the 2019 season, which is the last kind of full season we've had, I finished #1 in the hobby track, which was kind of based on my paint scores in the events that we did, and then #2 worldwide in the tournament track. I was #1 for most of the season, but between real life and some other young upstarts, I got dethroned close to the end of the season, and I'm really actually happy for Richard Siegler, who ended up taking the #1 spot. He's a great friend of mine, and I really look up to him. He's a great ambassador for the hobby as well. So it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Definitely he's way nicer than me for sure. So I'm glad that he won it. So I finished very, very high in the ITC in 2019. Obviously last year I didn't get any events in, and this year I would probably get a few events in closer to the end of the year. But for now, I'm just trying to be safe and hopefully kind of produce some great content. So that's what I've been up to.
And then hopefully 2021 2020 is going to be 2021 is going to be a stop and start year, right? But 2022, hopefully, I get a real feeling from the community that I'm connected with that people really want to get out. People really want to take part in some tournaments and some events and some organized play. So I expect 2022, there's going to be a bit of an explosion, actually. And it'd be nice to see more people getting invested. Those who want to compete, more people getting invested in match play, competitive play, and competing. It's very, very hard to get in the top 10.
Yeah.
You've got to dedicate a significant amount of time and brain power doing it. So hats off to you.
Thank you. Yeah. Just to speak to what you just mentioned, I know the team behind the London Grand Tournament announced an event in Nottingham and in Leicester, I believe, this year, and I think they've already both sold out. I think one sold out in 2 days. These are like 250 person tournaments. And then I know Frontline Gaming is running quite a few large events in the US, and as they're announcing them, they're selling out fairly quick as well. So I think there's this
Yeah.
pent up demand right now for players to kind of get back in there, and start playing. And I think for me, anyways, I'm just excited to see my mates and my friends. Like that's the thing
Yeah.
that always draws me to those events, especially being in Canada on the West Coast. You know, there's only really one or two events within a small driving distance. Most events that I travel to, I'm looking at a 3 to 6 hour drive or a flight. So, and I know sometimes people in the UK, like I tell them that and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe you're going so far for a tournament. And I'm like, that's normal. Like
Yeah.
an 8 or 9 hour drive is very normal for me to go to an event because I mean, we live in a massive country and it's sparsely populated. So oftentimes that means going down to the US or driving, you know, quite a while to the close event or flying off more often than not. And it can get expensive, but I miss my friends and I'm excited to just go. Even if I don't play, like I'd be excited to just show up to an event and, you know, hang out.
8 or 9 hour drive. That's just madness. That's like Scotland. I'm in my 40s and I've never been to Scotland. It's madness. How you can't go that far.
Yeah. Well, in 2019, I won a Adepticon, and I was in Toronto at the time. And Toronto to Chicago, it's about a 9 hour drive. And I only went. The only reason I went was the very last minute because I decided I had some friends that were driving, and I was like, "Oh, sure, I'll come." So it was kind of funny
Right.
because I kind of decided last minute to go, and then ended up winning the whole tournament. So
Nice.
that was a fun trip. So I
Yeah.
guess I just wanted to talk a little bit about the format of the show. This is our pilot episode.
Yep.
Um, this is our pilot episode, so I kind of want to go through what the show's going to be, what it's not going to be, and kind of how you guys can, especially the viewers, can get involved because this is a show that I really have been thinking about for a while, and you know, I don't want to turn this show into something where I sit there and I go through stats or I read army lists out. That's not very interesting to me. So the format of the show and moving forward after the pilot episode is every Monday at 6 o'clock Pacific Standard, so or Pacific Daylight Time right now. We're in daylight saving, so we're going to be
Yeah.
airing a new episode, and that'll be a live show on Twitch and YouTube, and that'll be 4 times a month, and then once a month. So every fourth show will be exclusive to Deployment Zone TV. And that'll be a show where the only way to access that episode is to get into the Deployment Zone TV. I'd highly recommend it as and I'm sure Winters will talk about it a little bit more, but there's a ton of content back there that isn't just you know, it's kind of, you know, I've watched a lot of the videos and all the content is great. Play on Tabletop is doing a series for them, which is going to be awesome. I actually just filmed with them on Sunday. I did a
Nice.
full army showcase and then battle report. The army showcase, I was like so excited to do. It took my chaos took the entire 6x4 table. Almost
Right.
no space left. So if you guys want to see some previews of that, check out my Instagram. And then I won't tell you guys what happened in the game because I don't want to spoil anything. But it's a
Yeah.
very close game, nail biter to the end. So I'm excited for that episode to go
Nice.
up live. It should hopefully be up in the next 3 or 4 weeks. And then we're gonna have a regular co-host. So he's not on today because I have Winters, but Alex McDougall, who is a very high level player from British Columbia. I think he actually won Best Tyranids maybe last in 2019. He just like me is kind of a one faction person. I play Chaos very regularly, and he plays Forces of the Hive Mind. So he plays Genestealer Cult and Tyranids almost like exclusively. So we're not
Mm.
meta chasers in that sense, where we're always playing armies
Good.
that are kind of what we love, rather than always playing kind of the flavor of the month army. And that'll be every Monday. And then I'll always be announcing the guests in advance as well. So mostly it'll be Alex and me. Sometimes it'll be a guest host, depending on Alex's availability, because he's not able to commit to a full weekly schedule. And what we will be doing, of course, is posting. There'll be opportunities for anyone that watches the show to ask Q&A. So a big part of this show is going to be a Q&A section, and we're going to do a little Q&A at the end after our weekly topic. But what I want to do is I want to hear from you. I want to hear from the audience. I want to hear if there's any questions you have about lists, meta, armies, factions, anything at all related to kind of higher level competitive 40K, how to beat a certain faction, you know, what kind of options you think you should be taking. We'll be answering those questions. And obviously, I'll be kind of putting out in our weekly kind of announcements how to best ask those questions as well. Obviously, there'll be some exclusive Discord channels on Deployment Zone where you can ask questions, and those will obviously be prioritized a little bit because we want to help out those members as well. The show will also be available in all the regular podcast places. So after the show airs, you'll be able to grab it on Google, on Apple, Spotify. I believe we're on uh, like Podbean. Like, I don't even know. There's so many podcasts. I use Apple. I'm very simple because it's on my phone. I didn't realize how many podcasting like apps and sites there were until I started like distributing. So if you guys want to see us on a podcast app that we're not currently on, just please be sure to reach out, and we'll definitely try to get on there, because as long as it doesn't cost me anything, I'm happy to put it on every platform I can. And if you're looking for the show, search for the Best Overall Show. So that's one of our other two shows that we do. So on Thursdays we do the Best Overall Show, which is a bit of a variety show on this channel. We cover everything. There's no real, like, it's kind of like the Seinfeld of YouTube shows. It's a 40K show about nothing. So we kind of just talk about whatever we want. And then on Tuesdays, I have a show called Politics and Plastics, and in that show we discover and talk about very kind of, really like interesting, or I guess controversial would be a way to put it, or difficult questions that relate to our community. Yesterday we actually had a really long conversation about whether people that cheat in the hobby can redeem themselves and what that looks like. And so it's a great show. I had Neil Kerr, who's actually the head judge of the WTC, on. So he had a lot of really great insight from his years of judging the WTC. And next week, I actually have Val Heffelfinger on, and we're going to talk about whether 40K could or should be an esport, and if it should be, what that would look like and what needs to happen. And I know that's something that he's very passionate about. So that'll be next Tuesday at 6 p.m.
It's probably worth mentioning again, like you do every time in the show, that it's, even though it's called Politics in Plastic, it's not about politics.
That's right. It's just the politics of our hobby, like the kind of like
the politics
in plastic, politics in plastic. So it's there's no actual real life politics involved.
No.
I was 50% on the name, and then after I got when I announced the show the first time, I got a bunch of people on Twitter basically flaming me immediately, and I was like, immediately I got to keep it, because I've already stirred up like a hornet's nest. People thought I was going to be talking about like actual real life politics. And so as soon as I created it, there's controversy around it. I was like, well, we got to keep the name now, because it's definitely. So check that out.
This is
so it'll be Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays, 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time on the channel. And yeah, that's kind of the show. So with that said, I guess, I don't know, Winters, did you have anything to add or anything you want to?
No. I like the fact that you're keeping yourself busy.
Yeah.
Jumping into this both feet first. I love it.
Well, you know what? I figured that I'm already, well, first of all, I'm not playing games, like really, outside of some tabletop simulators. So, and I generally hobby every night anyways. Like usually I get home from work and I'm painting for 2 to 3 hours a night. So I figured, you know what? Why don't I just start doing some content? And I'm also doing just regular hobby and hangouts on my Twitch channel, where I'm just like literally painting. This week I'm actually starting to work on a Silent King model, which I'm really excited about. I've never painted any Necrons. I don't think since like the old 3rd edition Necrons. I think I maybe dry brushed once. So this is my first Necron ever. So I'm starting to work on that this week. I've been putting it together today, and it's like, I'm like, oh man, this is a complex model. The model kits these days are insane.
Yeah, I mean the old 3rd edition Necrons were like stick men, weren't they?
They held the gun like this, and it was like a totally static pose.
And now you've got the Silent King, which is about 150 parts.
Yeah,
and it's I love it.
Yeah, so I'm excited to.
But
go ahead.
I just this thing though, competitive corner with Jim Vessel. I like it. This is about. It's almost like a training school. The Q&A, if people have questions. You're doing it on the Monday in case there's any events or news that comes out over the weekend. It's this is going to be cutting edge stuff, Jim.
Yeah,
I love
my
it.
plan, and it's purposely on Mondays because generally tournaments will finish Sunday night, so I want to review any sort of tournament specific news. As I mentioned, we're not going to be doing like a top 5 results. There's a lot of podcasts out there that do that. We're not going to be sitting there going through list by list, but if there's cool list tech that we really like, or if there's certain things that are very interesting to us from the events, we'll definitely talk about it. If there are surprising results from certain events, like maybe someone or some list that no one would have predicted, or there's some sort of list tech or list tactics that we saw over the weekend, we definitely want to talk about it while it's kind of fresh. And so that was the reason that we decided to do this show on Mondays. So hopefully, the audience tunes in and we'll get lots of great questions as well. And obviously, we'll take lots of live questions as well from the Twitch and YouTube chat as well. So feel free to throw in your questions into the chat, even today if you'd like. We're not going to do a ton of questions today, but yeah.
And talking about lists and what works and how to best build lists or how to best play a certain faction, we all do that anyway, don't we? That's what people do. Sitting down, I mean, I certainly do it with my friends, sitting down, have a cup of tea, a couple of Jaffa cakes, talking about the latest list that we're building. And then we have you guys doing it. And you are a tournament vet and your co-host tournament vets. So you've got some real experience from the competitive scene and some real knowledge from the competitive scene. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, and ultimately our goal is, we don't, and when I always think of the word competitive is not tournaments. Competitive just means like, you want to learn how to get really good at the game and how to win your games, whether it's narrative, open play, match play, maybe you're doing crusade, right? And doing it in a way that is fun and like obviously at a very high level of sportsmanship. So for me, oftentimes people kind of conflate, someone maybe that doesn't play in tournaments, that's not their thing, right? That's totally fine, but we still want you to help you be better at playing the army that you chose. So you really understand, how the army works, the mechanics of it. Are there certain things that are better than others and why? So just really trying to help people understand how to improve their play, both and whatever format they enjoy the most, right? So not everyone is into tournaments, and obviously right now most of the games people are probably playing is in gardens and in garages over tournaments anyway. So hopefully we can give a little bit of advice to the audience. All right, so awesome. So with that said, so today's the weekly topic is, as I alluded to earlier, is Drukhari, and obviously the book's been out in the wild for 2 or 3 weeks now. Winters, have you had a chance to play against Drukhari? Have you had a chance to look at the book? Like, what are your kind of initial thoughts on the book now that it's out? Kind of had a little bit of time to gestate, I guess, in the public eye.
Yeah. Well, I'm one of the lucky people that Games Workshop send pre-releases to. So I've been sitting on it for about a month now. And before I do my codex reviews, I do a shorter one on YouTube and then a longer one in the deployment zone. And before I do those reviews, I do read it all the way through and then read it all the way through again. So I do a deep dive into it. And I have played against Drukhari twice. I haven't filmed them, but out in the garden, a bit of garden hammer with a friend. So yeah, my initial view, the simplest way to Drukhari has been brought up to 9th edition, hasn't it? That's the simplest way to say it. They're more effective at what they do. And I tend to think that one of Drukhari's weakest parts previously were they tended to fall off by the end of the game because they're made of paper, because they're made of glass cannons. I remember back in 4th and 5th edition, they either tabled people or got tabled by people. Either they were completely wiping people out or they are being removed off the table. And now that 5-up invulnerable save kicks in turn 4 or sometimes in turn 3 with Cabal of the Black Heart, they tend not to fall off the table in those last couple of games as well. So that inherent weakness that they had seem to have mitigated against it. But more than that, those little units that are absorbing a third of all the firepower or the attacks coming in because they're making their 5-up invulnerable save, those little 2 or 3 man units left at the end of the game, they're the ones with the blasters. They're the ones with that relic in. They're the ones with the, you never take away the blaster first. So they're hanging around a little bit longer. The power creep has gone up because codex creep is real. It's always been real. And that subtle change to the invulnerable save on the tabletop made them feel a little bit different in the end game, the end turns of the game. To me, that was my impression. Have you had a chance to go against them yet?
So I've played one game against them on Tabletop Simulator. I actually ran the Terminus S foot list from the Cardon supplement, Warzone 1. I think it's called Cardon.
Death Guard.
And I had about 100 Poxwalkers, which was amazing. Not great in Tabletop Simulator, I'll tell you that. Like, moving 100 Poxwalkers with your mouse is not a lot harder than it sounds, especially given the collision detection in that. It was, I just got rolled. Like the amount of damage that the army puts out, the speed especially, like the fact that they're
Yeah.
able to go from one area of the table to another very quickly and redeploy and kind of react a lot quicker. Like Death Guard is
Yeah.
not, I've been playing mostly Death Guard with a little bit of Chaos Space Marine sprinkled in. Death Guard is not an army that reacts. It's an army that makes you react. So you just go to your thing and you're there and you're kind of just hanging out and you force your opponent to react. And one of the things that I found really difficult to deal with Drukhari is that they are able to pick and choose where they want to fight, how they want to fight, and what they want to fight with. And so that ability to really pick and choose each engagement on their terms, it makes them just so strong, independent of the fact that the units are actually really good. But just their speed, especially being able to advance and charge from turn 2, which is usually the turn that you want to be doing that
Yes.
anyways, means that they're
Yeah.
buzzing across the board really quickly. They're moving and they're able to apply pressure into various areas of the game and on the table. And by the time you get there to react as a Death Guard player, they're gone and they're somewhere else. So you're kind of chasing your own
Yeah.
tail a little bit. So I found them very difficult to deal with. But I think there is some, I think actually Death Guard are one of the better factions to play against them because they do have the resiliency to kind of absorb all those attacks. And I know there's lots of talk right now of some of the like super succubuses running around with
Yeah.
like a million attacks. I
Yeah.
do think that we'll probably see a little bit of an adjustment in the FAQ. And that actually is a really good topic that I wanted to bring up. And I know it's something that we see often in Age of Sigmar, which is that a lot of events, especially, generally will wait for the Age of Sigmar FAQs before they allow the books in a competitive event because I guess
Right.
historically the Age of Sigmar books have not been exactly super balanced right out of the gates, and almost everyone has required some pretty heavy-handed like adjustments. And I'm not sure why, and that's obviously an Age of Sigmar thing, but when I look at some of these combos in Drukhari, I kind of am thinking, okay, well, is this so strong and so did someone miss this? And should we be waiting
Yeah.
for an FAQ? What are your thoughts on that? Is that something that you think? I mean, obviously, I guess in a non-competitive environment, it's not very fun to get rolled by these lists that maybe have some broken interactions. Is that something that you think, you know, we should be kind of looking
Broken
at?
into well, there's two conversations. One is to talk about Dark Eldar in themselves, Drukhari in themselves being broken. They're a finesse army. You have to be good at the game, I think, to play them. It's not an army that you'd recommend to new people, right?
No, it's a glass cannon, as they say.
But if you are experienced, they're a good finesse army and they're a good trading army. You can put a unit up to block, to screen out something huge like knights, and then that knight is killing 5 things, and then you jump on it. So they're a good trade army. They're a good screen army. However, assuming that you know what you're doing and you're playing them, is there some broken combinations in there? Yes, I've met the succubus. Because normally the ability to attack a unit that you haven't charged, you can't do that,
Right.
right? You have to declare a charge against that unit and extra units. But that stratagem, it's a 2-point stratagem, I believe, which says at the end of the fight phase, if you are in an engagement range of another unit, you may attack that other unit.
Right.
So the first time I met her, because I met her in both games, I was playing Space Marines, being dirty, and she attacked a unit of Hellblasters, killed the remaining Hellblasters that I had, and then consolidated 6 inches into a unit of Intercessors and killed another 6 of them at the end of the fight phase. I obviously beat her up, punched her back, got her down to 1 wound, but she's still there. So there's some interactions like that in the book which probably need addressing. There's the patrol question that needs
Hmm.
addressing. You bring 3 patrols, you get +2 command points, right? You don't start the game with 12, you start the game with 14
Right.
because all patrols are free,
Yeah.
and you get +2 because your warlord is in that patrol.
Right.
So that seems to be a rule that doesn't seem to be intended that way. Rules as written, rules as intended. I think that needs a FAQ. And there's a couple of other little nuggets in there which are they broken? There's a couple of unintended rules consequences in there that do need a FAQ,
Yeah.
but there always are, right? After every codex, there always is.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you. I think for the most part, I think they might be slightly undercosted. It's funny that a lot of I think we all generally like the supplements, the idea of supplements. Um, new rules, extra rules is always something fun, especially when they're tied to like really cool story or really cool storyline advancement, which is something that I wish 40K did. Took a lesson from Age of Sigmar a little bit more. I feel like the way that they advance their storyline and have a lot more happening is much more,
Yeah.
I guess, exciting. I love the Age of Sigmar lore. I always like read it, I follow it, even though I don't play the game. Although I am planning to start a small Grave Lords army because I love vampire counts, and so doing a small,
Okay.
so stay tuned for that. But I guess with your,
Another army.
yeah, I mean, although to be fair, like I don't have a ton of personal projects on the go right now, so
Okay.
um, but yeah, I think the big issue for me is um, sometimes it almost feels like there's two different teams. There's like a codex team, and then there's like the supplement team, and then sometimes they don't talk, and something gets
Yeah.
released. That's some unintentional stacking of rules, which is what we're seeing with this succubus with like 42 attacks, or and we're talking
Yeah.
about 60-point models here, right? So it would be one thing if it was like 100 points or even 120 points. When it's a 60-point
Yeah.
model that's like you're taking anyways, it's definitely a little bit of a
Yeah.
feel bad. So I'm hoping that we do see a little bit of a tweak. And I'm especially hoping that maybe in the summer, and we're getting very quickly there, we do get a chapter approved with maybe kind of a points update across the board. I know that's something that they have done in the past, and I'm really hoping we see something like that. Just to, again, I think one of the great things about Games Workshop that they've done in the last 3-4 years is that commitment to keeping the rules updated, keeping the FAQs
Yeah.
updated, and annually updating the points. That was something that like sounds very like luxurious now, and nice now, but like in 7th edition or 6th edition, those are just that was not a thing. Like your book got released, and unless there
No.
was like a blatant typo, like something that was 100 points was supposed to be was listed as 1 point, you literally just didn't. There was no other adjustments.
Yeah.
That was it for 3-4 years. You're
Yeah.
playing at that. So the fact that we're even getting like the annual points increases and the updates, I'm actually really excited about, and I think it's something that
Yeah.
they can use
We
to.
wouldn't get a fact. We wouldn't get a fact for years, would we? It could be 3, 4 years. One of the reasons why I'm sure one of the many reasons why ITC became successful probably is because they did their own facts, which they asked the community to help them with. And so to play competitively, to play tournament play, you had to get the facts from the ITC to how do I play this broken unit effectively in a tournament? Well, this is I'll follow this fact here. Do you think the Drukhari are undercosted then?
A little bit.
As
So
a
to throw some actual math in, they actually have had if you pull out the mirror match, so Drukhari versus Drukhari, over the last two tournament weekends, which is when they've been mostly active, they've had a 72% win rate, which
okay,
is, to put into perspective, Yannari, I don't know if everyone remembers the horrors of Yannari in 8th edition. At their
yeah,
peak, when they were like the most broken, they were around a 60%. So Drukhari's, and some of that can be attributed to new codex. Not everyone knows the new book, but the fact that
yeah,
they are able to have not just such good rules and such strong units, but so many of them, you kind of create this issue where it's like, I think even if the point, like, I think everything could stay the same, and they could maybe bump up the points by say like 10 to 15% off over the board, and they'd probably still be just as competitive.
mm,
Sometimes when you look at a 60-point succubus, like as you mentioned, I
mm,
I can't think of what I can get in my Death Guard book. There's nothing. The cheapest thing is
yeah.
95 points in my book. I think I don't think I can maybe buy some Poxwalkers for 60 points. So it's just it feels, I guess, out of tune a bit, not a ton. I just think slightly out of tune with the rest of the books. I'm curious, do you like what you mentioned the power creep coming and that it always happens. Do you feel, are you really noticing, and I don't know if you've seen this in your games, but are you noticing at all that? Like, I know we had Dark Angels and everyone was losing their mind. When Death Guard came out, everyone was talking about Mortarion, how are you going to kill,
Lost
and,
their
and no one's
mind.
really
Yeah,
in competitive lists anyways. Mortarion's not that popular because he's actually not the greatest choice in competitive lists, because he's so many points. And so we saw the sky
yeah,
is falling with Death Guard, the sky is falling with Dark Angels. Now we're seeing the sky is
yeah,
falling with Drukhari. Do you think this is just
yeah.
do you think this is just a case of players freaking out at new stuff? Because that's what's kind of the history showed. Or do you think there is actually that power creep that you kind of mentioned?
Well, it's both. There's codex creep is real and has always been around, and I see it in the community. I see it in my community as well, talking about it. Close friends talk about it, but I remember talking about it in 7th when we had the formations, and how they were ruining the game. I remember talking about it when Grey Knights burst onto the scene and there was Cybolt ammunition everywhere on the Stormbolters and on the autocannons. I remember Harlequins in second edition, which would get as many attacks per inches that they moved, and you could charge with a solitaire 16 inches and it would have 5 base attacks plus and get 21 attacks with a Harlequin's Kiss, which would ignore invulnerable say. It was just a nightmare. So there's always been codex creep, and the only times they really adjusted it was when 8th dropped and everything was reset. We had the indexes come out, and maybe after second edition, first and I believe there's been 3 editions of 40k. There's been first, second edition, then a reset, then there was third through to 7th, and now there's 8th and 9th.
I agree. Those are the biggest changes in the core systems that we've seen.
Yeah, the core system changes. So every time a new book comes out, there's a bit of creep, but companies do that, whether it's Magic the Gathering, whether it's Call of Duty trying to sell you a new weapon bundle. This one has a higher time to kill than the previous thing. And it all gets crazier and crazier and crazier until there's a bit of a reset. So that's what happens. But as you say, Drukhari have currently got a 71% kill rate. Don't change it too soon. I think you need to FAQ and errata the clear and obvious mistakes, but it's got to settle in the ecosystem. For every rock, there will be a scissors. For every paper, there will be a thing.
Yeah.
Rock paper. There's always a counter. That there's so many rules, interactions, so many factions in this game. I'm sure that Dark Eldar will blow a few people out of the water. If no other codex is released for the next 6 months, Dark Eldar will rule the roost for a couple of months until someone comes up with those lists that routinely beat them all the time, and then everyone will say, oh, they're broken. Bring this instead, bring that instead. So yes, codex creep is a real. Drukhari do feel a bit overpowered. I don't think we have much data because of COVID, because of lockdowns, because of things like this. But I think if the water was left to settle for a while, I mean, they're still made of glass. Drukhari are still made of glass. You can kill them easily. Toughness 3 running around all over the place. Vehicles with toughness 5 or toughness 6 with a 4-up save. How hard is that to kill?
Yeah.
A Venom, I know they're -1 to hit, but come on.
It's funny you mentioned them being the last codex for 6 months. That might be a bit clairvoyant given Games Workshop's recent announcement that there's no pre-orders for the next 3 weeks. So fingers crossed that it's only 3 weeks and we'll get our AdMech codex soon. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at this point if it is actually the next codex for the next 6 months. So, we're getting too close to the end of the episode. Winters, any questions that you have for me, or anything that you want to answer, or if there's anyone that's watching, any questions that you guys have right now?
I do have one, because it's a Q&A thing,
Q&A,
right?
Absolutely.
So at the in November, hopefully the No Retreat Legends event will be happening in Gibraltar. Play on Tabletop should be there. Mini Wargaming Dave will be there. Tabletop Titans, Tabletop Titans.
Amazing.
Me, I'm going. So, and it's on this big boat, and it's going to be, we're going to be doing some streaming. Hopefully Games Workshop will be there as well. Now, there's a couple of factions that I'm thinking of bringing. And one of them, you'll be pleased to know, is Death Guard.
Nice.
Is the Chaos, because I like the Chaos thing. So a question for you would be, what would be the strongest way, most competitive way to play Death Guard at the moment, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I'd say if you step back and look at a pure, and I assume you're talking about pure Death Guard.
Yeah, pure Death Guard. So I know, because you mix it with the Nurgle and the demons, and yeah, I know. But that will change when the Nurgle demons will change their rules by the time of November. Let's assume just Death Guard. Death Guard.
So with Death Guard, there's a few standout units. Now I'm not sure. I think they're standout just due to kind of a conflicts of cost and effectiveness. So Poxwalkers, as I mentioned, they're, for 5 points, you're getting a T4 OBSEC troop with a 6+ feel no pain. Now they are quite slow. They move 4 inches a turn. So, and there's a bit of a limit to them with, like, you need to have a unit of core Bubotic Astartes infantry. So you're talking Plague Marines or other things. So, but generally almost every, like, the cultists are just not great. Cultists are not worth taking at this point.
Yeah.
You might, because the autoguns don't do anything. You might as well take a cultist Poxwalker at that point. The stratagems, the two stratagems that really bring Poxwalkers to the next level is the Deadwalk again, which allows you to bring them back. And where that kind of can be very janky and competitive is if you're not on an objective and they shoot you, and then you can basically raise your models onto an objective. And since that happens in the command phase, before you count whether you control an objective, you can essentially be off an objective. Maybe your opponent just puts one model on there, and then raise Poxwalkers kind of onto that objective, and then now you control it. So it enables to it kind of breaks the regular order of game, and in a game where it's entirely based around controlling objectives, they're really hard. And then Mutant Strain, which is the other stratagem they have, basically allows them to do mortal wounds on 6s to hit, which is insane when you think about it. 6 to hit, not 6 to wound. And 2 attacks each, a unit of 10 putting out 20 attacks. I mean, you're looking at probably like 3 to 4 mortal wounds. If you combine that with Harbingers, which has a stratagem, which is one of the plague companies with that Typhus leads, they have a stratagem that lets you reroll all hit rolls for Poxwalkers. So when you stack those two, a unit of 10 gets 20 attacks, rerolling all hits. And what you do is, even if you say hit on a 5 and a 6, you just fish for 6s. So you roll all your dice, you pull your 6s out, and you just reroll everything else, even if those ones are hits too, because you're trying to fish for 6s. And I've had a unit of 10 Poxwalkers kill Trajan Valores, who's got like a 7 wound Custode in one phase. They did like 7 mortal wounds to him, like a 50-point unit. So Poxwalkers are great. That's the first thing. Go ahead.
So the question there is, because I play Death Guard quite a lot, and I would have played Death Guard. I always play Death Guard rather defensively, running around on the objectives in the backfield and camping here and camping there, because the thing that I use with Poxwalkers is they don't run away. They're fearless, right? But you're saying, no, bring a lot of them and use them aggressively, charge them forward.
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily like charge them and don't put them in situations where you're just going to lose them. But I guess my point is they have they have this kind of like ability to have burst damage. So I wouldn't play them super offensively, but sometimes people think, oh, they're just 5-point models, and they maybe put things a little too close to them, or high value targets that they're not expecting Poxwalkers to kill. And you can really catch them with that stratagem. Like what it does is it gives them a little bit of that edge that actually makes your opponent be scared to just throw something in there. Because if you have a unit of 20, and say I charge in with my, like, I don't know, 10 10 intercessors, right? On average, maybe I kill like 11 Poxwalkers and there's only 9 left. Normally I wouldn't care. I'd be like, whatever, I'm gonna kill his Poxwalkers. But even 9 Poxwalkers, when they're doing mortal wounds on 6s, it actually makes you rethink a lot about whether you want to actually charge into that army. Right. So it just gives them a little bit of like it's like they're not just there to die. They actually can put out a little bit of damage. And that's where I think that they have that extra edge. Death Trap Terminators are really, really strong right now, and that's mostly attributed to the fact that they're very versatile. So between the 2 attack profiles, they're able to both kill hordes and big monsters. And then you can also combine that with certain other stratagems. So one very popular one right now is the biologist Putrefier, who is the kind of he's got a bunch of vials of poison and stuff, and he can pick a unit to do mortal wounds on 6s to wound. And if you give him Arch Contaminator, which allows each of your models within 6 inches reroll wound rolls in combat, you actually can replicate that same mechanic that I just explained on the Poxwalkers on the Death Shrouds. So 3 Death Shrouds using their sweep attack. It's going to be 13 attacks, right? So 8 attacks each, so 16. It's gonna be 26 attacks from 3 Death Shroud. That's a lot of attacks from 3 models.
It's 4 attacks base on a normal Death Shroud.
Yeah, so you double that with the sweep attack, and then on 6s to wound, you get a mortal. But with Arch Contaminator, you reroll all your wounds. So now you have 26 attacks hitting on 2s, and then whatever your wound roll is, doesn't matter. Anything that's not a 6, you reroll it. So you're able to put out a ton of mortal wounds with them. And again, just a small unit of 3 can basically wipe out very high toughness targets, very hordes. They're just super versatile. The flamers, the pistols are actually not bad. The Plague Spirit Gauntlets are very strong. And then the last kind of, I guess, like my other top 3 units would be either having, and I would recommend either having one or the other in every list, which is either Plague Risk Crawlers or Volkite, Contemptor Volkite Dreadnoughts. Death Guard, because they're so slow, they really, really rely on having some ability to reach out and hurt people at range. If you
Yeah.
rely too much on their, like, most of their other shooting is bolters and 12-inch flamers. So you really
Yeah.
need to bring in some shooting elements in order to give them, to force the opponent to come to you, to not hide. And that's why I
Yeah.
really love Plague Risk Crawlers. And the Volkite Contemptors are really good. And why they're really good is because they have the core keyword. So that means it opens up a lot of stratagems, like the Tallyman's +1 to hit, like the Tallyman's
Yeah.
ability to give you exploding sixes. It also opens up things like reroll ones from a Demon Prince. And the Plague Burst Callers, on the other hand, those Plague Burst Mortars doing 3 damage with
Yeah.
there's a stratagem that gives you an extra damage, and the ability to shoot out of line of sight. It's something that we're seeing
Yeah.
less and less of in the edition, and something that I think is very strong still. So the Plague Burst Mortars bring an element where it allows you to, it forces your opponent not to just hide behind a piece of terrain, and it really allows you
Yeah.
to reach out and hurt those backfield objective holders, those smaller units that are kind of maybe just holding an objective behind the barrier. So if you were gonna go, I would tech into those 3 units. So those 2 kind of
Yeah.
main units, and then those combat, one or both of those shooting units. I've seen armies with both Plague Burst Callers and Volkite Contemptors. I think it's probably a little bit too much, just because you start to
Okay.
lose out on like some of your heavy infantry. Like you start to have to underinvest in those, and I think that's something that's really core to the Death Guard army, is to have
Yeah.
lots of Terminators. Plague Marines are good. Possessed, I actually think, are a little bit of a hidden gem because of the fact that they move 7, and also Cloud of Flies only costs 2 CP on them. So unlike the Terminators, where it costs 4
Yeah.
CP,
4.
you can hide a 10-man unit of Possessed behind Poxwalkers for only 2 CP. So that makes them really
Mm.
strong as well. And again, with Arch Contaminator, you're looking at 30 to 40 attacks, AP2 plague weapons, so you're getting full rerolls. It can be very strong, and they're fast. They're
Yeah.
7 movement, which means that it just gives you, like, the difference between 5 and 7 is huge, right? People,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially on these smaller boards, people don't realize what just 2 inches of extra movement does. But being able to move 7
Yeah.
instead of 5, it's huge. So that would be kind of my, I guess, recommendations. Playing around with them, and checking into Death Guard right now.
I particularly like the standout suggestions that you have, like Poxwalkers, Plague Burst Crawlers, Death Shroud. To you, you're saying they stand out not necessarily because of the points or because of this, because it's because of what they can do in conjunction with some stratagems.
Right.
So even if there is a chapter approved, even if there is a points tweak here or there, unless they remove the strat on Poxwalkers where they can do mortal wounds on 6s, unless they remove the strat on Death Shroud where they, or nerf their data sheet where they can do double attacks, sweep attacks, that these things are always going to be applicable, and they don't tend to make those kind of sweeping changes. What they tend to do is change some wording here or there, or push some points up or push some points down. So the things that you're suggesting that make them good should always remain good in November when I'm going
Yeah.
to no retreat.
And
So
and the other thing too is that they're all multi-use. So Poxwalkers can hold backfield, they can do damage.
yeah.
Death Shroud
Yeah.
can kill big things, small things, and they have a bit of shooting. Plague Burst Crawlers can hold backfield, and they're really good for backfield objectives because they're hard to kill, and they can do a lot of
Yeah.
shooting. So all of these units have multi-use, and in an army where you don't have a ton of units, right? It's a very elite army. You need
It's elite army,
every
yeah.
unit to do more than one thing, right? You need it to be
Yeah.
able to do a little shooting and do a little fighting, do a little bit of living and holding objectives. It's really hard to justify units that just do one thing, because you just have so few units that you want a good variety. You want that, like, flexibility in your unit choices.
Yeah.
That's not to say things like Blight Lord Terminators aren't good. They're amazing. Plague Marines are good, but again, you want to be very smart about how you equip them. It's like, what is this unit for? I think a lot of people, when they look at Plague Marines, they're like, oh, I want to give it every, they can take
Yeah.
17 different weapon options. It's like, well, what are you going to use
Yeah.
that unit for, right? Be very, very targeted
Yeah.
in that. So yeah, so I think that's,
No, I completely agree.
I think that,
The Death Guard that I play on the channel when I play with the End of All Things, if I'm loading up some Plague Marines, then they're doing one of 2 things. They're either going forward quickly in a Rhino and they're loaded up to hurt,
mhm,
or they're small units that stay on the back that hover around and screen.
absolutely.
Yeah, I see too many chocolate box Plague Marine units out there, and I tend not
which
to play
look
them
really
that
cool
way.
because the models are beautiful, and I have 30 Plague Marines with all sorts of stuff, so I'd love to be able to run that kind of like Swiss Army knife unit, but it's just
Yeah.
it's like it's got a lost identity, like it doesn't know what it wants to do. So
And as you say, 21 points a model. As soon as you start adding things to those units, Death Guard can get very expensive very quickly. It's easy to take a patrol of Death Guard at 2,000 points. They can be that expensive.
Absolutely.
So,
All right, I think that's going to be it for the show. So thanks everyone for tuning
cool.
in. As I said, next episode is going to air next Monday at 6 p.m. I will check out Duplicity Paint on YouTube and Twitch. You'll see announcements on how to ask questions for future shows. Also, be sure to check out Deployment Zone TV. There'll be some info there, as well as the Discord channels for the show. You can get in direct contact with me. Feel free to also send me direct Instagram messages or Facebook. Well, don't send me Facebook messages because I get a lot of those too. I try to keep my Facebook just for me, but yeah. So if you guys want to reach out or have any additional questions, Winters, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a great, I think, first episode, and I'm excited to continue producing content and working together. So,
Nice.
all right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. All right. We'll see you guys on Monday. Bye-bye.